I feel so excited to introduce to you someone you already know very well, no doubt, Steve Tomasula, who is coming to us tonight to present TOC, which is a work that began in 1994 as a print short story, and now 20 years later has been adapted into an iPad app, which he tonight will demonstrate for you. It's a very faithful, it's in fact an exact remediation of the desktop version that was released in 2009. So in the interest of time, without further ado, Steve Tomasula.
TOC is a novel-length story about time, and basically, to me, it was always very much meant to be a book. You know, I wanted the reader to have like the kind of one-on-one experience that a person has with a book. And so it originally was a DVD, but when the iPad came out, it seemed like the perfect vehicle for this because you can have that kind of intimacy with it. So some parts are meant to be watched, some parts are meant to be Okay, so it begins in deep space, which is synonymous with deep time. What then is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I want to explain it to a questioner, I know not.
A distant world shines from another's past that is simultaneously our future. Is this a ripple in time or in life?
After the title page plays, an introduction comes up. But I'm going to skip that and just go to the first place that a reader would land. Here you're at an island where there's two brothers that are fighting each other over dominance. One is Chronos, or flowing time. The other one is Logos, or a moment filled with significance. And you get to vote for which of these visions of time you want to dominate by voting, by dragging this pebble over. So let me first vote for Chronos, or Logos rather. As you might expect in a novel about time, music is very important. Here it's in the form of this player piano roll, and some of the holes in the player piano roll are linked to different videos or animations or text pieces that you read. As you read these things, they build up a table of contents along the screen. And since I've already read some of these, or opened some of these, I'm going to do one of those. Let's try Visiting the Future. There was a woman who claimed she could visit the future by building a ladder so tall she could climb into the sky. Most of the people who heard about the woman and her screwy idea just went about their workaday lives. Those who took her seriously, though, were passionate in their insults. Focused on the present, as all of the people were, they couldn't understand why anyone would undertake a project so contrary to common sense, to decency, to the public good. They gathered at the site she had chosen for her experiment to heckle as she began to climb, growing more distressed the higher she went, throwing rocks at her to get her to come back down, then once she was so high that she was out of range, launching kites to pester her. Eventually she climbed out of range of the kites and was, in fact, so high that those on the ground could no longer see her. They stood there straining their eyes, blinded by the sun, trying to get a glimpse of any sign of life at the top of the ladder until their necks ached. After a while, they began to fear the worst, that she had somehow been swallowed by the future and would never be seen again, and they felt horrible remorse for having driven her to it. For her part, the view she had after climbing a few feet looked a lot like the view she had while on the ground. The report she gave to those standing around the base of her ladder confirmed what so many already believed, that the future would always be exactly like the present. But as she climbed higher, she began to see more. At the level of the kites, she could see all of the people and much of the present, where they lived, and this is where the phrase, "Hey, I can see my house from here," began. At the level of the birds, those on the ground were ants but moved as armies of people, in formation, so in step with one another that she wondered if synchronized marching had become the latest dance craze, even becoming, as she could see from higher up, the sole means of expression. When she climbed higher to see where all this marching led, she couldn't see anyone. It was as though not only individuals, but whole armies had vanished. That is, the more she could see, the less detail the future had. The more it did look like the present, except for one undeniable difference. As she looked back, she realized that she was no longer where she had been. Her mother, father, baby sister, all of the people she had loved, and all of the people who had heckled her were gone. She wept bitterly at the vision. What was worse, she couldn't bear the thought of climbing back down and reporting to her family that she had seen a future without them. She stayed on her ladder for the longest time, torn by indecision, unable to climb higher, but even more afraid to descend. In the end, hunger drew her back to earth, where she discovered to her surprise that instead of hecklers, she now faced a vigil that had been set up for her return. No one ever asked her what she had seen, and she never told them, and they loved each other passionately as though each day was their last, up until the very day that was. So the novel is basically like an animated graphic novel, or part myth, part fairy tale. As you read the text pieces, it builds up a collage of narrative. These down in the logos box are mainly come from like a mythic kind of time. Chronos is more of a temporal visual zoom lens where you can zoom in on a particular character. In this case, it's a woman whose husband is in a coma, and she's trying to figure out whether she should pull his plug or not. So I'll just play an excerpt from this animation.
When the model was allowed in after her husband's operation, she stood at the foot of his bed, unable to believe that the organic machine before her was him. His bugged eyes were enormous, twitching through cutouts in a plastic mask. A bellows forced air in, then drew it out of the cavity that had been, his body, while a pump, instead of a muscle, made heart waves course through plastic veins. He was in such shock, which is to say out of time, that she couldn't stop thinking of a poem about shades in a burning lake. Some of them sink to the bottom of the lake so that they can't swim out, it said, and these God forgets.
A fleshy nub, an expanding universe, as is cancer, a fingernail or tick, TOC, that can be pared away and, but not, forgotten.
For days after this reunion, the model's panic had matched her husband's shock. But then, as they both began to stabilize, they settled into a pattern completely unlike the weft of time they had shared before the accident. While she continued to work, posing so that the moment of her smile could be frozen as a reproducible object, she also spent vast quantities of what had previously been known as hours, sitting beside the organic machine that was, had been, is, her husband. First Word had brought many visitors, but gradually all but her brother found better things to do, and she passed into what felt like a form of jet lag, a weariness from crossing time zones to an era before harvest ceased to be a unit of time measure, before minuets hardened into synchronized schedules of work, before styles of clothes began to change, not as the generations, but as the winter, summer, or fall, into this year's fashions. She fell into an era that existed before time-serving shouldered eternity off the stage. That is, what she was now suffering, she realized, was the strain that had been going around for some time, an epidemic, as diagnosed by some and accepted by others as simply an exhaustion of the times, a malady much like the rootlessness brought on in earlier eras by inventions such as the zero. And yet, unlike most of the other citizens of X, the model wasn't at all stunned to discover that time existed only in its versions. Not not just any ordinary character paralyzed in amateur footage. Her perfect smile was luminously fixed, often and forever, by artful manipulation of film and shutter speed, a softening of lips by focus.
Intimate portraits of legs.
The camera is truth itself.
The wonder was that photo shoots hadn't suggested to her sooner the arbitrary nature of time, an artificial grid through which people could model the unmodeled. How else explain the existence of a sentence like, "Tomorrow was another day of work"?
So her story continues,
Tomorrow was.
but I'm going to skip ahead to the point before the accident happens that sends her husband into a coma. That is, as you move forward through the story, you actually move back in time. And the transition I'm going to play now is an animation that takes us back to the beginning of the story, but we won't have time to get there, I don't think, so maybe when I'm running out of time you can just flag me. There's a water stain on the player piano here that sends it to this original island, but I'm going to just take a shortcut and play the animation and it goes there.
When it came, the end was catastrophic. People have become so dependent on time that as they age, it permeated their cells. But even those who hadn't lived long enough to absorb time so profoundly suffered its dominion. It ruled the cycles of their government. It regulated their migrations, when they slept, when they ate, conceived. And of course, it had fused with their machines as thoroughly as it had their bodies. In this sense, every machine was a time machine, a derivative of the prime difference engine, an amazing mechanism of brass gears and escapements that regulated all reality and yet could not regulate itself. Present-sightedness, perhaps one of its many shafts was microscopically out of the round, or some friction went uncompensated. In any case, minute errors accumulated relentlessly, if invisibly, until one day, like a house of cards, time collapsed. And as time went, so went civilization. Archaeologists later estimated that entire villages were swept away because they had been established at the base of dikes by settlers who never once considered that time could break. Financial empires vanished so completely they seem to have been no more than dreams in the minds of the beggars who once owned them. Famine became widespread. Civil war followed, and the fighting was barbarous, with combatants using their inoperable clocks as clubs. Among those who managed to escape was Ephemera, the inventor of the difference engine. As might be imagined, the blessings and other technological wonders that were due to her invention became in many minds reasons to despise her once these blessings were lost. Through a logic of cause and effect, people began to blame Ephemera for all their woes. Soon gangs roamed the city, seizing her relatives and torturing them for not revealing her hiding place. In truth, these unfortunates would have gladly let the mob to Ephemera. They would have even helped place electrodes on her glass fingernails, if only to save themselves. The only reason they didn't reveal her whereabouts was because, as they cried out in pain, they didn't know, nor could they. One night the city began to burn. Its sky throbbed with smoke and flame. Hands to cheeks, Ephemera's glass fingernails reflected this orange glow as she gazed back from the stern of a barge that was slowly, with a muscle-made rhythm, rowed out to sea. The band of believers who fled with Ephemera were moved to pity by the sight of a queen weeping for her destroyed city. An ancient story, but they were forced to look to the future when they learned that her moon-shaped tears were swelled by pregnancy. As their barge drifted from one time zone to another, and fear of capture lessened, their hours increasingly became filled with speculation as to the identity of the father. All men, including the eunuchs, were questioned, with the sole result being a belief that the father was the difference engine itself, which Ephemera had enfolded in her cape the night they fled, clutching it to her breast like a lover she could not forsake. Biology took its course, and it wasn't very many generations before all of the people, like their first queen, had glass fingernails in the shape of an hourglass. Within each fingernail ran a sand, also as in the manner of an hourglass. During the day, while they went about their business, the sand within each glass nail ran toward their fingertips. At night, they slept with their arms elevated in slings, so that the sand would run back into the most palmward portion of their nails. This was vital, for if they failed to balance out their nights and days, the sand would stop running and they would die. Despite this urgency, however, each individual found this to be an increasingly difficult task to accomplish. Friction from the sand gradually, if resolutely, wore the hollow artery that connected the two globes of their nails, enlarging the hole so that as they aged, the sand ran faster from fingertip toward palm and back. That is, as they aged, time accelerated, and it was only a matter of time before a person would be caught with too much sand in the wrong place. Their deaths, their ends, were recorded in an enormous book and attributed to natural causes. As for beginnings.
And I'm going to end it here. Thanks very much.